Hey, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Real News Network podcast. I'm your host, Mel Bueller. Before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to take a moment to thank you, our listeners, for sticking with us as we work hard to bring you the independent journalism that you know and rely on. We don't take corporate cash, we don't have ads, and we don't put our reporting behind paywalls. Year after year, we've relied in part on your generous donations to keep the lights on and keep our shows running. If you love what we do and want to support us in our work, please take a moment and head on over to therealnews.com/donate. Your donations mean more to us than you know. If you'd like to stay up to date on the important stories that we're covering, sign up to our free newsletter at therealnews.com/sign-up and follow us on your favorite social media. We have incredible things planned for the new year, so you don't want to miss a moment. This year has been a banner year for workers in Hollywood's entertainment industry. Over the summer, the WGA went on strike and won significant gains in their contract, and SAG-AFTRA is in the midst of tough negotiations as their strike continues into yet another month. IATSE and Teamsters are working diligently to prepare for their own contract negotiations in 2024, with much of their membership expressing a serious need for vast improvements in their own contracts. Actions such as these have been a shot in the arm for Hollywood labor and have dominated media coverage of an industry that employs hundreds of thousands of workers. While these high-profile actions do much to expose the inequity and often harrowing working conditions that many workers in Hollywood endure, there are other groups within Hollywood that have felt the exploitation of the industry most acutely and are coming together to do something about it. Just this summer, after over a year of dedicated organizing, commercial production workers won big by chartering a new local with IATSE, bringing thousands of previously underrepresented or unrepresented workers across the country into the fold. Commercial production workers only represent a fraction of the production workers who work in the entertainment industry. That's where Production Assistants United comes in. With me today to discuss how PAs United is working to organize production workers in the film and television sector are Camille, Ethan, and Sam, who are the group of organizers who started Production Assistants United, which is a movement to unionize production assistants and support staff in film and television. As an editor's note, some of the workers today have chosen to use pseudonyms to protect their identities. Okay, let's get into it. First question. For many of my listeners, the film industry can kind of be a bit of an enigma. Everyday folks watch movies, tune in to see their favorite shows, but may not understand exactly how these shows get made or how many workers actually have a hand in creating them. I previously worked on an article over the summer on solidarity across the entertainment industry, and there is a bit of a brief conversation about what it means to be an above the line or below the line worker. But I'm more interested on your sector, the production workers. Can you kind of let folks know how these productions tend to work and where you, as the production workers, fit into that equation?
Well, I guess I'll kick it off. Film production and television production, it's not, at least for us, for below the line production workers, and production being a very broad term because we represent our organization specifically represents PAs from every department. So whether that's the actual production department, the AD department, art, camera, SFX, any of the tens of specifications that we have, all of the workers who work in those day-to-day businesses of creating film and TV work extremely long hours, minimum of 12 hours a day. We are actually all, when you get a job offer, one of the first conversations you'll have is like, what's the rate for 12 hours? Because that is the minimum you will work. Often, specifically for PAs, will work far more than that. It's 16 hours a day is, I would say, average. It can go up to 18, sometimes 20. And while pretty much every other worker on set or in the production office has a union that they can rely on that gets them better pay, health coverages, benefits, retirement packages, all of that, PAs don't get any of that. most often paid minimum wage or barely above it. We don't have anyone to turn to if there's workplace abuses, and frequently we're left kind of out in the cold without any of those protections.
Right. So for the audience to kind of understand, production assistants are often looked at as the sort of quote unquote entry level position into working on a set. It's my understanding that a lot of these workers will then go on to hopefully become producers or move into various other departments. But that isn't always the case, right? There are production assistants who make that sort of their career, right? Camille, would you say that's kind of a good understanding of what that is and how that works?
Yes. So being a production assistant is definitely seen as the entry level position. And it's the entry level position for pretty much any position on set. Like most people who are working on set in any department are probably going to be starting off as a production assistant at some point. And many departments also like costumes, art, etc. also have like their own like production assistants. So you might start off on set, then you end up being a production assistant for costumes, and then you actually get into like the costumes union. So, in terms of being entry level, yes, we do have people who also go on to be producers and directors, all the positions. People always say on set, like, be nice to the production assistants. So, not everyone listens, but be nice to the production assistants because they may be your boss someday. However, the barrier with that is definitely being able to survive long enough as a production assistant in order to actually advance. If you want to join, say, the DGA and be an AD, that means you have to have 600 days under your belt on a union set. That's not necessarily easy to get. A lot of people burn out before they're ever able to get up to that level. And there are many people who never even join the industry in the first place just because, like, even at entry level, the barrier is so hard to both get into being a set PA and then get out of a set PA that some people don't even try.
Ethan, so the film and television industry, as you guys have already mentioned, is historically a very heavily unionized industry. WGA, SAG-AFTRA, DGA, IATSE, Teamsters, IBEW, many other unions have participated in the production process over the last 100 or so years, right? Why do you think it is that production workers haven't been included in this union process? Do you think this is just a gap to be addressed, or do you think this is something that has been deliberate? What do you think? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of unique difficulties for production assistants specifically. A lot of people end up, you know, going into other departments as a production assistant. So you might stay as a production assistant for 3 to 5 years, and then you end up in a, sorry, and then you end up in a different department entirely. So it's one of those things that you have to organize yourself. uh so I think it's an inevitable thing. If we weren't doing it, it would happen eventually. But you have to organize your own self. Unfortunately, nobody's going to do it for you. So I think that's part of the reason why it's taken a little bit uh of time. I'm very confident in our movement. Um but yeah, I mean, I think there's also a sort of a stigma for PAs, um, that they might not deserve a union, uh, because they are.
Which is obviously bull, right? Everyone deserves a union, but
Yeah,
continue.
exactly. It's of my opinion that there's uh you can argue a PA is skilled or unskilled all day, and I disagree with the idea of even arguing with that, because doesn't matter. All workers deserve union representation, in my opinion. So that argument is flawed, yeah, even to talk about it.
I can imagine that because this position is viewed as an entry level, air quotes for the listeners, entry level position, but you end up staying in the job for 5 to 6 years, right? And you may get into another union. So why would you need to be quote unquote unionized? Why would you need to have that space if the idea is to just start somewhere and move somewhere else that has union representation? And I can see that many folks would make that argument. Again, that argument is bull, because you do spend, 5, 6 years, 7 years, or shorter or longer, without union representation. And, working on union sets is my understanding. There's already a mechanism in place for you to be able to benefit from, um, the sort of things that union contracts allow for, and, restricting those sort of workplace abuses. If you get the chance, right? So I think this is, from my own personal opinion, this is a great thing to see from where I'm sitting, right? I became aware of your organizing when I came across your Instagram page last summer, last couple of months. Ethan, I think you and I met at a IATSE event, halfway through the WGA strike. And you've opened your DMs for anonymous tipsters to kind of share what their experience has been working on sets, enduring the sort of exploitation that comes with, unfortunately, comes with this kind of job. I got to tell you, some of those stories are pretty horrifying. Some of the things that production assistants have to endure in order to maintain standing in the industry, or even just a paycheck, is it sucks. It sucks. They really do offer a clue into how you as production workers are often exploited by these folks. The people who sign your paychecks, or, heads of other departments, or actors, or whoever else, right? Producers and so on. Now you can go into as much or as little detail as you like, but I do think that it's kind of important for our listeners to kind of understand the working conditions that you're laboring under, and to speak to sort of what these working conditions are. We don't have to bring up specific stories. I understand how this industry works from where I've, been sitting, and it's one of the reasons why you're using pseudonyms, is because sometimes this conversation can be dangerous for future career prospects, right? But you've been conducting a sort of pseudo survey by allowing individuals to send in anonymous tips about what their working conditions are. So could you kind of speak to, what sort of patterns are you seeing from, and any of you three, Sam or Camille or Ethan, you can kind of talk about this. What are the kind of patterns that you're seeing in terms of the working conditions themselves that you feel organizing this union can help improve or stop all outright, right? What are the things that you think are important for our listeners to understand?
Um, I would say that something that's important to understand, and like you see it reverberated through like the stories of like a lot of the people who are like sending in stories to us, is essentially that for us, like unionization, like there's like a very specific financial motive for like us like not to be unionized. Like films and television, they save a lot of budget on like not having us as protected workers. So you'll see one of the stories that's like told over and over from a lot of people is like, since we work such extensive hours, and they're okay with us working extensive hours because we don't have meal penalties the way that like other people do. And we don't get like the same sort of like lush, like we don't have any sort of like turnaround time either, like other unions do. So that means there's not a required period of time for like us ending work to the time we come back to work. So you'll see a common narrative in a lot of the stories that people send in to us. It's just that they're tired. There's a lot of stories of people being like, oh, like I'm tired. I worked like 16, 17 hours. I almost fell asleep on the road. I almost got into an accident. I did get into an accident. I have one coworker from a while ago who actually she got a concussion on the way into work, and that goes into the entire culture of like all of us working long hours. So she got into a concussion when she was in a van that was driven by one of our teamsters, obviously. But then when she comes into work, she still has a concussion. She's feeling the effects of the concussion, but she feels like she can't go home
Right.
because of all of the pressures that are put on to us. They save money by also understaffing us as well. And because we don't have a union, we can't say that we have like minimum staffing guidelines. And that's another reason that she was afraid to go home, is because we also just didn't have enough staff because they didn't want to like pay us for more staff. So a lot of the stories is the results of people essentially cutting corners on the budget and trying to save money. But when you cut those corners and you try to save that money, it always ends up falling on the backs of the PAs.
Right. So, for context, meal penalties are penalties, usually financial, that are if you're required to work through a lunch, for example, right? Am I understanding this
Um,
correctly?
well, a meal penalty is usually used more for how long does it take for you to eat lunch after you started work? Because there's a required amount of time that you are allowed to go before you eat lunch. And then once you push past that, then you start racking up meal penalties because we're filming into lunch. Lunch is late, you get more money.
Right.
However, for production assistants, we don't get meal penalties. So that's something that they really like to use for us. So they can call us in as early as they want. So we can be working as many hours. I've worked 8 hours, sometimes more, before I've actually been able to like sit and eat lunch. We don't get any additional money for that the way that other positions on the crew would. And then, like, in addition to that, they're also allowed to ask us to work during lunch. So they can come up to us or call us over the mic during lunch, and there's also no repercussions for that.
I was just gonna say that we actually do get a single meal penalty. It is $7.50. Whereas, so if we go 10 minutes past that like 6 hour point where we're supposed to have a break, we will get $7.50. And that's it for the day. It doesn't matter how much further you go after that, how many more half hours past that break point you go, we will get 750. IA members will, and I believe SAG members and other people who work on set, they will stack, and the meal penalties get steeper and more often as time goes on.
Right.
Where, so say you meal penalty once at lunch, and then you go another, like, you go way into OT, and you do another 8 hours after lunch. Everybody else will be getting multiple meal penalties from that. We will just get the single one from lunch, and
Right.
we'll also be the ones staying much longer after everybody else is wrapped.
Something else to note for listeners is to drive home this point is that one of the main contentions of IATSE's last contract cycle and strike authorization was the concept of letting us rest, right? So production assistants, from what I'm hearing, do not have that minimum turnaround time. And IATSE almost struck over the same concept of having 12 hours of rest in between time off and starting up again. And this is a big deal because when you are working 18-hour days. You get off work at 3 a.m. You have to drive sometimes a couple of hours, perhaps, to get home. That's a dangerous thing. And then you have to get back up in the morning at 5 a.m. and start work again. This is a big deal for workers across this industry, is what I've come to learn. It's unfortunately not a surprise that PAs are experiencing such the effects of this attempt to try and cut budgets and keep shooting schedules shorter in order to save money, right?
On the subject of the, like, your question though, of kind of themes that we've seen um in our informal survey stuff, another just related kind of to rest is a very kind of fun classic PA trope, which is not being allowed to sit on set,
Mm,
having sitting. I personally have been told by producers who have walked by me sitting that it's disrespectful, that I'm disrespecting the crew, I'm not paying my dues, and that's a pretty common refrain that we've heard. So just in addition to the long days and the meal penalties and the no turnaround time, um just being told that you're literally not allowed to be seen sitting because you don't look like you're working hard enough is crazy.
It reminds me of working in the service industry. I worked in the bar industry for 10, 15 years while I was going through school and even after, prior to really digging into journalism full time, and the whole concept of if you have time to lean, you have time to clean. There's no downtime, right?
Yeah, there's a
And
lot of crossover between
right. You
that
see
the
you
restaurant industry.
Right. You see a lot of this in just the concept of quote unquote unskilled work, right? Where if you don't look busy, then you're lazy and you're wasting the time and the money of the people who pay uh, you, who sign your paychecks, right? It looks bad to customers or whatever, right? And obviously that's bull, right? Obviously that's not legitimate. Um, you know, um, the concept of rest at work is really important. And it's certainly something that many folks do organize over and is really important to highlight. So I appreciate that additional sort of conversation about that. Again, it sounds like the working conditions here are not great. And given all of this conversation about what happens on a set, and how the PAs fit into this, and also kind of looking at the success of the commercial production workers at the newly formed Production Workers Guild, IATSE 111. Um, how did you get started? Was this something where you saw their organizing and you were inspired by it and you felt that there was still a gap there that needed to be addressed in terms of organizing in the film and television sector? Or was this something else that you uh, felt you needed to address?
Yeah, I think I can answer that. I think all of us individually have been interested in unionizing production assistants for years. I mean, me personally, years. I'm pretty sure everybody years. With Stand with Production and the new local for commercials, it really helped kick us off. Because it just proves, okay, a big argument before that happened was, you know, PAs aren't something that gets unionized. And clearly they've proved that wrong. So they were also already unionized in animation, uh, but yes, what ended up happening is we all sort of individually were part of helping that movement, Stand with Production movement. Uh, and then once they were officially recognized as a union, um, they kind of brought us all together. So it was actually them that that brought us together.
So tell us a little bit more about your organization, what you're hoping to accomplish to alleviate some of the worst of the working conditions that you're forced to labor under on set. Do you have a sense of how big your pledged membership is, or who shows up to your working events? Give us a better understanding of how it's been going so far.
I mean, getting numbers is actually a kind of our biggest priority right now, getting an idea, get it because there's never been a real census of how many production assistants there are working in this country. So one of our big things that we're focusing on right now is outreach and doing things like hosting town halls, getting people involved, getting people to talk to their friends about us and sign our petition, put their name down in interest so we can get an idea of how many of us there are, where everybody is, what departments everyone works in, eventually what studios they tend to work at, that sort of deal.
I was just going to add on that, like, at the moment, we think it's probably in the realm of like thousands when you actually like take all the positions production assistants work in and you move across the country and all the productions we have going on. But yeah, one of the difficulties with that is also like how transient our specific position is. You can kind of just like jump in and out of being a set PA. Like a lot of people leave the industry or they go into other unions. So that's why we're really trying to focus on outreach and making people know that we are here and we are trying to unionize.
Have you received any positive response, say, from example, IATSE, as they've chartered their new local? Have you heard anything from any of the sort of working organizers with that organization? Or are you thinking that, you know, perhaps you would like to just create your own independent union to address these problems? Any response?
Yeah, so the way that we are going about it is sort of with the understanding that it's, not us, the three of us to make those types of decisions. We're just here to organize, and get as many, numbers as possible, and then it's going to be the members who will decide, how we want it to look like. But yes, all those things that you just said are open and are options for us. IATSE, our own union, some other, umbrella union, any of those would be great. We really want to just see people, the most people possible, unionized.
I think that's great. I think it seems to me from my perspective looking into this industry that really was previously pretty opaque to me as a consumer, right? You know, the TV show shows up on the TV and I don't know how this gets made and it seems like movie magic, but you scratch away at the pain a little bit and you go, "Holy crap, like there's a lot going on here and there's a lot of exploitation that's happening." And there have been waves in the last couple of years of really dedicated organizing across unions in the entertainment industry and the film and TV industry to try and really push back against some of that unchecked exploitation that the studios have dumped on everyone's heads, whether that's the contract negotiations like WGA or seeing these really important new locals getting chartered, right? Or, way out on the side of the scope is, reality TV actors trying to organize or things of that nature, right? And I think really most notably what we're seeing is really dedicated, really intense organizing from below the line workers such as yourselves, right? That really bear the brunt of the gnarly things that happen on set. And I think PAs United really fits right into that in a big way. Yeah. How do you feel about that? Do you agree? Do you think that's kind of where you feel you're sitting in terms of the organizing that you're doing?
Yeah, I believe that we all think that organizing production assistance is sort of fundamental as we're moving forward and sort of like the greater labor movement going on. I feel like when you look into any sort of the media and press, especially surrounding like the striking actors and like the striking writers, or even like the potential strike with IATSE that almost happened a couple years back. Like you read through those things, and all of those like exploitations are very real and very clear. However, production assistants are always kind of just like left completely out of the article, or if we're referred to at all, is usually by like a sentence. And when you take that and it's like the way that people get into this industry, like it's the way that we're really supposed to be building ourselves up, is fun, especially when you take into account the entire like diversity thing of Hollywood as well. Like when you make an entry level position really hard to get into and really hard to stay in, it acts as its own sort of filter. And when you have that filter there, then it impacts the rest of the industry. So if we're not being supportive of our workers and inclusive at the very, very bottom of our industry, how are we supposed to change the
Right.
industry as a whole? And also, since we are the storytellers of the country and we like push that out into the rest of the world, it's even more important to make sure that everyone is included and paid well and feels like they're in a secure place.
Absolutely. Final question here. What can folks outside of Hollywood or even within Los Angeles and, ingratiated with the entertainment industry with film and television, what can folks do to support your organizing efforts? How can we help make this goal of organizing film and television production assistants, production workers a reality for you? What can we do?
I'll answer that one. I think that so again, the whole goal is just to get our numbers up. So that's always gonna be the baseline goal. So basically what that means for you, the listener, is to go ahead and tell your friends if you know anybody who's in the film industry. Most people in the film industry know production assistants. So even if they're not a production assistant themselves, go ahead and let them know. And then also, just support unions in general is always great. And then, yeah, go ahead and follow our page because that helps too, just for people to see that we have a good following. So it's Production Assistants United at on Instagram, and then you can also go to our website pasunited.com. We will have fundraising in the future, not as today, but definitely follow the page for updates on that.
Fantastic. That's all the time we have today. Thanks again for joining us, you three. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me about this. The open invite to come back on the podcast at any time to talk about your organizing efforts, to give us updates on how things are going. If major things start moving later on down the road and you want to use us on our platform, we are here for you, and we absolutely respect and want to see this a success. Let's do it. Um, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Yeah,
you for having us.
thanks for
Yeah,
having
thank
us.
you.
Absolutely. That's it for us here at the Real News Network podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Mel Buer. If you loved today's episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get notified when the next one drops. You can find us on most platforms for that. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can find me on social media. My DMs are always open. Or you can send me a message via email at mel@therealnews.com. Send your tips, comments, questions, episode ideas. You can yell at me. You can compliment me. I don't mind. Just shoot me a message. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for watching the Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work. So please tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to the Real News Network. Solidarity forever.